now like to introduce you to Katie McRobert, the General Manager with the Australian Farm Institute, who will facilitate this panel session. Katie will be joined on the panel today by Professor David Lamb, Nick Ennis, New South Wales General Manager of Lawson's Grains, and joining us virtually, because we had to adapt and be nimble and change due to COVID, is Dr. Sue Keay and Stephen Saunders. So Sue Keay is a robotics technology lead from Oz Minerals, and Stephen Saunders is the CEO and founder of Robotics Plus. So if you can engage via slido.com, that would be fantastic. Handing over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Sam. And I'd like to start by going, I think, to our online panellists, Steve and Sue. Steve, you're the CEO of Robotics Plus. You also lead a tech incubator and you're a co-founder of the Newnan Park Innovation Centre and you're an active angel investor. What lessons have you learnt about getting meaningful adoption on customers' farms, and where do you look for investment opportunities for these kinds of technical, emergent opportunities?
Thanks, Katie. I'm actually a farmer by trade, so I've been 35 years a farmer, and I guess a number of years ago, I could start to see the challenges that we were facing in our own farming systems, particularly around labour, safety, and a range of other areas. And that really was where Robotics Plus was formed just over 10 years ago. The integration piece has always been the really interesting part from a farming perspective. And there's many areas that you sort of got to look at when you're thinking about this adoption. And for us, the first part's really the understanding the true problem you're trying to solve. So that's really that customer, being with the customer, really understanding what is it we're trying to solve here, how it may impact on the upstream and the downstream parts of the operation, and how it needs to integrate, and what sort of data might be required or what data is valuable in that integration. Then we sort of got to think about the return on investment. So what is the required return on investment? So there's no point in building $1 million robot that makes no economic sense to a farmer. So we really have to understand the economics. Where's the price point for this technology got to sit to be meaningful? It's also around the value add. What is the other value add the technology can bring into the integrated system? There's the comfort around the reliability, robustness, and serviceability. For example, one of our technologies, we've got over 200 machines around the world globally integrated now, but we have a case in Australia where for a service agent, it's a day's job to go to the machine and back, just the shared driving time, the time to service it and then get back. It's the ease of maintenance, remote support, trust and safety. And then again, as David mentioned earlier, is that staff capability, that training of staff and people. And then, of course, we've got the regulatory certifications and environments, and that can vary from country to country. So, we've learned a lot about all the various regulations, even from electrical regulations through to safety regulations, a wide range of stuff. So there's a lot to consider in this, and then put on top of that is ag is a time game. It takes time to develop these technologies, and we're very keen often to get minimum viable product in market as quick as possible and get those learnings with the customer as fast as possible.
There's a few different things I want to come back to there, but something you said, Steve, reminded me, Dave, in your presentation you had a note about technology providers cashing in or crashing in. And Nick, you might want to weigh in on this as well. Do you think there's an element of people crashing in without knowing what the value proposition really is, what they're trying to solve?
Well, it's not lost on me that many of the most effective providers, I'm going to use the most effective, I guess, as a subjective sense, like Steve, for example, they're grassroots producers in their own right and have an instinctive feel for the value proposition pathways, and that's something that, if we get time, I'd love to understand when you're measuring up the value proposition, which is what are those elements of a value proposition. So I think it's really important that we've got these providers, and it's also, when you look at our companies like FarmBot, Ceres Tag, you look at SIBO Labs, the people that are playing, that are forming stable markets in our space have a heritage in food production themselves. That's really important. And certainly if you don't have it, sidle up to those that do. So.
Nick?
Yeah, and I think from my point of view as well, when you start partnering with people that are, and businesses that are producing new technology, is to understand the level of support that you're going to receive from those guys as well. Is it going to be dropped on your doorstep and you have to deal with all the malfunctions and everything that goes along with it too. So you need a really good understanding and working relationship with those companies and partners as well.
Thanks. Now, Dr. Sue Keay, you're the robotics tech lead at Oz Minerals. What else can agriculture learn from the experiences in other industries when it comes to applying autonomy and robotics?
Yes, thanks. I'm also the chair of Robotics Australia Group. So, we put together the robotics roadmap for Australia. And I think that agriculture is in a very good spot because what Australia specialises in is the development of what we call field robots or outdoor artificial intelligence. And so that is applicable across a range of different sectors. And I agree with some of the other comments by panelists in terms of how it's always advantageous to have technology that has been developed with domain experts involved in that process. However, I think we're at a stage where a lot of this technology is so immature that to really take advantage of it, there are quite a lot of businesses that are, full of people who are specialists in robotics or computer vision or related areas. And they do, need a hand from people in the domain to be able to take advantage of that. Because one of the things that we definitely saw when we were putting the roadmap together were that there is a lot of disconnect between the different sectors. So everyone operates in their own silo. So yes, there are advantages to having domain experts help to develop things, but it can also then close them off to being used by other sectors, at least in the short term. And so I think we do have to be mindful of that. The areas in Australia that are taking up robotics at pace are defence, and I think there are probably a lot of crossovers between the types of robotics that are being developed in that space with agriculture and also, of course, with mining. And, I think if we could find some ways to break down the barriers between those different sectors so that we could see, much better flow of information and ideas so that, something that has been developed in one sector can more readily be transferred into another sector, adjacent sector, then that would be really advantageous.
Has the mining industry come across the sort of social licence issues that Dave had touched on in his presentation? Well, I can't speak for the entire mining industry, so I'm not sure that it is that it has been a significant issue to date. Mainly because most systems are operating within the boundaries of mine sites that already have permission to be operating a whole range of activities. I guess in a similar way that's true of many farms. So. I think that is an issue potentially more around workforce in terms of social license to operate and the concern people have about the impact that a lot of these technologies will have in the future. However, in general, robots really only replace tasks rather than jobs in most situations and lead to people being able to take on higher value adding opportunities for their businesses. And, clearly in agriculture where, it's also very difficult to necessarily find the labour that is required to be able to conduct certain tasks, then it's really a necessity to be able to deploy these technologies and hopefully some of the aspects around social license really take that into consideration. That does tie in with one of the questions coming through. There's lots of questions in Slido now, so you can actually calm down the Slido for a little bit while we try and catch up. First question from Michael Gooden about how the unintended consequences of declining rural communities by reducing on-farm labour requirements can be addressed when we're considering autonomy. Nick, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first for this, as an early adopter of this kind of tech on a fairly large scale.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, or not concept, but it's an interesting question, and something that gets asked of me often by my staff and others in our team. That if we start automating is that going to replace staff? And that's a real concern for a lot of people. But I think what was just touched on then, that a lot of these machines and robots or whatever it may be, it's not actually replacing people, it's replacing tasks. And something that we're very mindful of in terms of safety is making sure people aren't getting fatigued. We really need to manage fatigue. So a really good example of that is during a harvest operation, for example, where we could be working long hours. A wet harvest, we need to be operating spray rigs as well, almost following on behind harvesters, and we just haven't got enough staff to do it. So if we can put an autonomous machine in the field following the harvest crew, that takes a huge amount of work away from potentially already starting to fatigue staff members.
Yep. Steve?
Yeah, very, very similar to Nick. I think it's about replacing tasks. It's removing people from those dull, dirty, dangerous jobs. And I think Nick summed it up. I think, particularly with the onset of COVID, this realisation that we just don't have the people to do these jobs. And if we're going to be sustainable and if we're going to help feed the world, we don't have a lot of choice to do that. And I think the other important piece is it is about creating better quality jobs. And I think we're seeing in some of our communities high quality people coming back into the communities because there's more interesting, higher level, high quality jobs available around managing these technology systems. And I think that in itself is quite interesting. And we're seeing, less reliance on having to bring RSE workers or other people in to do some of these tasks. So I think there's lots of checks and balances. I think there's lots of different ways that this applies, and there's no simple answer to it. But I think it's the reality is we need AI, we need these automations to be sustainable into the future.
So having these things on farm, that requires not just to have them themselves, but as Dave pointed out, you need the skills to operate them and to understand the data you're getting in to be able to control the entire system. A question from Emma Leonard: there's a shortage of traditional ag skills, so how will those with skills in electrical engineering and cybersecurity, etc., for the digital farm be found? If we're already having a skills shortage, how are we going to suddenly address this potentially widening skills gap? Dave?
Thanks, Emma. I think I've spent most of my career responding to some of your hard questions. I can hear you laughing. So, okay, so I'm going to use an example. Swarm Farm Robotics have got an operation just up near Harden, and you walk onto that farm, which is a proper commercial farm, where they're also setting up their business, their tech development activities, and you run into 4 mechanical engineers, 2 of which were local kids that went off to university and heading off into the big wide world, but ended up back home to their joy, because there was actually a use for their skills, so they came back home. 2 others, never been in the bush before, came from Sydney in fact, if I have that correct in my mind. So what I'm getting at here is there is an opportunity. I mean, there are people in this room up in the top tier here that probably have their eyes on some technology, some engineering or science, STEM related career. Well, guess what? There is ample work for you back out in the regions, back on farms, back with farming businesses, because of that very demand. So yes, we do have a workforce shortage, but I think we've not tapped into the full gamut of opportunities to bring the workforce back, the way we market it, the way we engage with our trainings, our universities, our vet sector, to show our students, our future workers, that there is a future back in the bush where you came from, or back in the bush where you might want to go, and I might add, afford a house at the same time. So I just think we haven't got the workforce engagement piece sorted yet, which is why we're experiencing this problem. But I'm not suggesting that's the only solution, but I think it would make a difference.
Sue, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're already seeing a transfer of talent and skills out into regional areas, thanks to COVID. So a lot of people have moved north into Queensland from Sydney and Melbourne, and they're not necessarily settling in Brisbane. They're settling in regional areas because of for lifestyle reasons. So in terms of the risks of denuding, some of these regional areas and how we're going to build up the skills, I think it is that matter of, having an attractive lifestyle, just as David's described, with people who might want to come back to the area, or people who find that they fall in love with the area, and giving people that opportunity, because increasingly, as we solve connectivity issues, it really is possible for people to work from anywhere. And that's true whether it's for farms or whether it's, working in a big bank in Sydney. They could do that from Emerald.
So is there a genuine opportunity that place-based working has now changed completely in most industries? Would there be a genuine opportunity, does the panel think, for remote farming from anywhere within the country, considering in an ideal world that connectivity is solved? Could people farm from places that they don't live? Steve?
Yeah, I say let's gamify farming. I think as the technology improves, I guess our big challenge is Dave talked about earlier is that connectivity. We've really got to improve our connectivity systems. But I have 100 robotics staff in the region, in amongst horticulture, developing technologies, and I've got people that are ex-Uber, Tesla. I got people from around the world, all just located in a small region in New Zealand, working on robotics. It's about purpose. It's about the lifestyle. It's about really wanting to solve global problems. And so we've been attracting an incredible amount of talent into a small region in New Zealand from around the world. And then we've also got remote people, because you can't always find those skill sets within the region. So there are particular pieces that can be done remotely. So some of the software, data science work, that sort of thing, we have remote hubs where we can tap into further talent pools to support. And then we've put a lot of investment into our polytechs universities around about how do we create our new farmers of the future? How do we get them excited by the technologies? And when I'm in the US a lot of when we're integrating robots up there, a lot of people say, well, how do we? Where's that talent going to come from? And we have to think as the makers of these technologies about how we make these technologies exciting for young people, and be thinking about what other types of young people that are going to be coming through and actually operating these technologies and operating these farms. So, don't make a big clunky remote control to drive a vehicle. You want to have it like a PlayStation, gaming console that, people are really used to. You got to think about the skill sets that our young generation have, and how, what excites them and how they might integrate with these technologies.
Nick, how much of your work is hands-on and how much is hands-free?
Quite a lot still hands-on. So we're obviously using technology like, old technology like auto steering, that sort of stuff, of course. But we're certainly, one of the biggest issues that we have as farming in regional and remote areas is absolutely connectivity. So we've tried a lot of different technology that has worked, then failed, worked and failed because of connectivity. So there is solutions to that that we're working with now, which is really interesting. But in terms of, I suppose, taking a backward step, or not a backward step, but looking at a couple of other questions now about being able to farm remotely, we've been doing that for a long time, even just on platforms like My John Deere, where we can actually control machines from a mobile phone, see where they are. We can track them at any time of the day or night, and that technology's been there for a long time. It's a matter of honing that. I think a really good example, in 2013 I had a new sprayer coming in from the States that actually sent an alert out saying it was low on fuel, and that was in the middle of the night, and I thought it actually was a machine that was near Rand, so I thought it was being stolen. So it was all panic stations and, right, everyone, let's get up to Rand and we'll tackle these blokes in the bloody sprayer, but it was actually just coming off the ship in Melbourne. So that technology's been around for a while, but it's pretty cool. So, and I think also for younger people, look, we've got a number of staff members and casual staff members that attend university at CSU here, studying agriculture, that bring to our business a level of experience and like passion for this sort of farming and robotics that it's just inspiring. It's these guys are going to really take us into the future and make sure people like me they'll take me along for the ride. So it's pretty exciting.
Okay. So sticking with the social theme for a bit more longer, we've got a few questions from the floor related to this, and one maybe follows on from what you're saying. Is there a risk of creating digital inequality in agriculture? Could we end up with a system where we have the haves and the have-nots, the people who have access to this cutting-edge, labour-saving, efficient technology, and those who don't? Dave?
Well, when you ask the question, the first thinking is, okay, let's talk about digital literacy, maturity, willingness to adopt. But actually, there's another element of inequality that I want to raise, and that's around connectedness. If you look around Australia, those organisations that are leading the way in digital innovation adoption on farm tend to be ones that are connected, i.e. they're connected into a value chain that demands the flow of data and information up and down their own contained supply chain, or they're connecting sideways into something, for example, but not limited to, it could be some sort of sustainability reporting, which again demands data going out. They're part of a community. What I'm observing is that those organisations, which are led by our corporate farmers, are really leading that way. So I would suggest that the haves and the have-nots may actually boil down to the connectedness of the farming system, and whether or not you're part of a vertical or you're part of some sideways connection. But then, of course, there is that whole issue around the confidence. But it's not as straightforward as you think. If you can all picture the adoption curve, you've got the early adopters a little bit at front, you've got the bulk of your adoption population in the middle, and then you've got your sort of the so-called laggards. I hate the term, but the ones a little more reticent at the end. What we're finding is it's not as just that. We're actually finding that whilst the ones that are more reluctant to adopt may have issues around, digital confidence, literacy, maturity, if you can use that, even some of our innovators right at the front are challenging, for example, black box solutions. They know their system, they know enough around the technology and what the data means. They want to get under the bonnet of the product and services being offered, and they're nibbling away at that peak in the middle. So haves and have-nots for me is connectedness of a farming system or farming operation, and of course that whole point around that sort of education, confidence, literacy piece.
Steve or Sue, did you want to weigh in on that question?
All I'll say is I think that a lot of this is going to be driven by consumers, and unfortunately some aspects of these technologies will result in outcomes that consumers are keen to have. So just to give one example, if you're able to sort fruit and detect defects using infrared, whereas everyone else is just using visual inspection, and that can actually show when fruit has defects beneath the surface, eventually the people who are buying the fruit will be wanting to be able to access fruit that has been sorted using that technology, and it's going to put pressure on everybody else to be able to adopt that technology or to be able to send their fruit to be able to go through the same process. So in some respects I feel that this train is already on the rails and it's left the station, and that it is going to be very hard for people to opt out.
I agree with Sue on that comment, and I always use this saying I love, which is if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. So I think people have got to get with, change is coming, and I agree with Dave too. There's always that adoption curve that always follows, and eventually people have to get there because they're getting left behind.
So on that though, the adoption hasn't been as quick as maybe we would like to think in an ideal world it would be. There was a report 2017 that Dave was heavily involved in, along with the Farm Institute and a few other people in the room, about precision to decision agriculture and how big a gap there was in the current systems and where the opportunities lay, noting that there was a potential $24 billion opportunity for Australian agriculture in fully adopting digital agriculture. But all these years on, nearly 5 years now, it hasn't changed a lot. It's changed incrementally, but there's not been a really big step change. So there's a few points here I've got to unpack, but what does the panel think is holding people back? What is that adoption resistance about? Nick?
Yeah, great question. I think there's probably a fear of the unknown to a certain extent, but even it was interesting. I was on a panel last night with our local grower group, the Riverine Plains, looking at drought preparedness, which seems quite ironic with the amount of rainfall we've got around at the moment. But I was quite surprised when I was talking about understanding soil and using the technology that we've got available to us to help understand our soil. Lack of understanding of some people in that webinar, and the simplicity of some of the questions that were being asked, that I just assumed that people would know. So there's obviously quite an education gap in some areas. How we fix that, I'm not quite sure.
Dave?
When I think back to 2017, when the P2D report was built, the surf was up, the tech surf was up in farming and food production. I'm not going to suggest it was a tech push, but there was a lot of opportunity and excitement around this, farming 4.0. And I think that what we have enjoyed in the time since is that our innovators and those that are offering products or services are actually taking the time, because they've realised you just don't throw the stuff out there and people will buy it. They're taking the time to sit down with clients and understand what the system, what the farming business looks like, and working out how to dovetail their product and solution into it, playing a more active role. So it feeds into the value proposition piece. You buy a bit of tech, it promises you X, Y, and Z, but will it actually give you that in your business, in the way you work, the way your people work, the way you're connected across your own production system? So I think that 2017, we identified, if you like, the dollar value of the excitement around it and what could be the art of the possible. I think in the last 5 years, it's what I've really enjoyed watching are these innovators, our innovators out there that are actually rolling their sleeves up and staying the long course with producers and understanding what is required of their product and service to deliver it in. And that's why I think when you look around the room, when you see the logos on the walls and on the vehicles, there's a lot less of them now than there was 5 years ago. They're the stayers who've worked out exactly what it will take to offer a meaningful product and solution. So I think it's time. We just needed time.
One of the articles in the journal that you referred to earlier, Dave, talked about the cognitive factors that limit adoption as well, and it was suggested that part of the adoption barrier was that there's a loss of farmer knowledge and social experience networks when moving to autonomy, because you're taking people out of the systems, you're putting more decision making on one person who's then relying on a whole lot of technology to help make those decisions, but that's removing some of those over the fence conversations, some of the pub chats. Steve, do you think this is a real problem or is it a perception problem?
I think it's a perception problem personally. I think there is what we're generally seeing is you've got those traditional agronomists that are there to support from technical aspects. You're getting new skill sets that are coming and really absorbing that knowledge and then working out how to take it to the next level. And they're very resource savvy. They can look up, they can find those resources, and they can connect those resources to what they're trying to do. I think I just want to sort of touch on a little bit of the last bit you were discussing in this bit, but I think that the challenge that I've seen, and I'm talking more in specialty crops, because I think Broadacre is quite a very well done area with John Deere and Trimble and Case New Holland, all the big players. Broadacre's big acreage, it's an attractive market. And it's big open space, but especially tree crop, it is a long, slow, hard road into adoption in those areas that very challenging environments to solve a lot of different problems in. And I think it takes a long time to develop those technologies and build the trust with the growers. And And I think that's been challenging for a lot of startups because a lot of the funds, being venture capital or whatever, have a short-term horizon. They don't have a long-term horizon, and that's been quite challenging. We've been lucky in terms of a Robotics Plus perspective that, we had investment by someone like Yamaha Motor Co, who's taking a longer view and their desire to help support agriculture into the future. But for a lot of startups, it is really quite challenging to get that funding and keep that course. And I think, to Dave's point, a lot have disappeared, and I think we're probably about to see quite a bit of carnage out there, and in some of those ag tech spaces. A lot of companies been around a long time and not broken the adoption mold, and are going to go under or disappear shortly. But that will build resilience and the movement of people with those that they've learnt some of those lessons. But the point I want to make is that I think one of the challenges, we approach these things in too much of an individual way. So a lot of tech companies are coming in and just trying to solve a single problem, as opposed to looking at the whole of the value chain. And the approach we're doing in New Zealand now, particularly with things like our Sustainable Farming Fund, future funds that the government put in, is bringing commercial and tech companies together and looking at whole of supply chain. And so we're putting projects together where we have some of the Oz tech companies, New Zealand tech companies that aren't competing with each other, but can look across the supply chain. And then how do we actually create that real whole of supply chain approach to solving the problem, as opposed to just coming in and, hey, I'm going to solve picking an apple. That may create a whole lot of other problems, in the upstream or downstream. So it is starting, and also the universities. There's a lot of this research going on, but it's not connected commercially. So we're involved in every university robotics program in New Zealand. But we're not co-designing these approaches. So by the time we get the university stuff, we look and say, well, hey, that's interesting, but we've got to rewrite it totally to be able to, or redo the whole bit of work to make it a commercial product, because the universities developed this without that commercial output piece in mind. So again, better connection and better cooperation and co-designing from all the way through from the farming, the universities with the tech companies, so that actually everyone's got the view through to really to make all this investment work really, really well.
Thank you. There's a few more questions from the floor we'd like to try and get through in the next 10 minutes if we can. One is from Terry Granshaw about whether or not we've seen the value of properties that use digital agriculture increasing. Is there a market for data? Nick?
Is there a market for data? I can't see the value of properties increasing because of the technology that we're using. That's more of a hardware piece, I would have thought. Short answer, I wouldn't have thought so, because I'd like to be able to retain that data myself, as opposed to letting someone else or giving someone else access to it, or potentially selling it. And as being someone with a long vision for agriculture in all the country that we farm, and the farms that we do farm, it's very important for me that we keep that data. I'm certainly not looking to sell it. I want to make sure.
Dave, there's really two questions in there, but if you want to have a go at either of them or both.
I guess to recount a personal experience, so my wife Jane and I recently looked at purchasing some land, unsuccessful, we're not that rich, but one of the first questions we got asked by the banker was, do you have any soil sample data for this property? So in other words, here's an example where data not necessarily had intrinsic dollar value to the vendor, but actually was important to the banker to understand the risk of the purchase. So there are elements of value that we just are still unpacking today around the value of data, and it could be simply a case of the value of data is going to be really understood in its absence. And I think more and more indirect inroads are being made onto, well, tell us a bit more about this particular system or this particular production system or this farmer's or this food producer's behaviour. And I guess I also wanted to talk, maybe answer it by harking back to the earlier question around the importance of partnerships, and I think Steve raised this. We're moving from situations now where a single vendor of a product or service who developed their business around tackling a problem is now partnering with others. So, for example, on the Global Digital Farm, we have Ceres Tag, we have tracking tags on our animals, but Ceres Tag makes tags. What you do when you buy the tags is you then select who do you want the data made available through, and you can select a couple of platform providers. In our case, we went with Sebo Labs. Sebo Labs offers, on top of the ability to render the data, other value adds like look at your feed base across your farm on your paddocks, digital feed base estimates and so forth. That sort of mixing of data from various sources into one aggregated form adds enormous value. Now again, it's about, well, does that add value to the farm? I think it adds value to the producer in terms of their day-to-day operation, but like I said in my earlier comment, I think there is value in it. We just haven't unpacked it yet, and like I said, bankers, insurers, it could be really valuable to them, which means it's valuable to us one way or another.
And that ties in with another question from the floor, which I'll also bring in the rest of the panel on, about whether there are environmental and efficiency wins brought about by autonomous farming, which will in turn enhance the marketing and reputation of the agriculture sector. And I can tell you that the Australian Farm Institute has done a lot of work on the ag sustainability framework over the past 12 to 18 months, starting off on the premise that sustainability would be something you could get a premium for, and now within even a very short space of time, moving away from the conversation about premiums to really having a ticket to play. What you said, Dave, that your finance providers, your banks, your insurers need to know what you're doing on that property to make sure it is sustainable, that you're hitting your environmental, social and governance goals. And so autonomous farming and potentially robotics can play into that and provide some of that assurance, as well as providing the farm owner or manager what she or he need to improve things on the farm as well. Sue, what are you seeing in terms of your experience from those environmental gains brought about by autonomy and robotics?
I think Swarm Farm is a really good example of this, and it also shows the benefits of actually embracing, I guess, new aspects of technology rather than, we are getting to the point where a lot of equipment can be retrofitted, but there are a lot of advantages in actually redesigning processes from scratch. And so in the case of Swarm Farm, as we know, most equipment on farms is maximised around the utility of the farmer. So you make it as big as possible so that, the farmer can cover as much ground as possible, because, it might not be possible to have more than one person working that area. However, the way that the Bates have tackled this problem at Swarm Farm is that they have redesigned so that instead of having one large piece of equipment, because it's autonomous and so you're not reliant on one driver, you can have a number of smaller pieces of equipment, which has a number of benefits, not just for the environment, but also for maintenance and costs. So one, it means that you're not damaging the soils as you would with a large, heavy piece of equipment, because you're using multiple lighter pieces of equipment. But also it means that if one piece of equipment is, fails, then you don't have to stop operations. You can just keep going with the remainder of the equipment that you have. So it makes it easier to swap out. It also means that the unit price of each of those pieces of equipment is much smaller. So there are, not just environmental benefits, there are a range of benefits if we look at, how you can actually take the full advantages of autonomy rather than just automating the processes that we've already done, actually having a look at what those processes are and how you can adapt them so that they are either more environmentally friendly, more cost effective. As I said, there's a range of different benefits, not just environmental.
Thanks. And with only 3 minutes to go, I'll put the same question to the last three panellists as well. So, Steve, what role does hands-free farming have in agricultural sustainability?
Yeah, it has a huge role, and that's a total focus from us with Robotics Plus. So all our vehicles are full electric, hybrid, so using the combustion engine to generate power, it's a lot more efficient. We have no hydraulics. We have, and then it gives better efficiency in the way we drive the implements from a fuel consumption point of view, but also we're working in terms of being able to totally replace that combustion with full battery technology when that technology catches up, when it's powerful enough, I guess, to run a tractor and an implement or a machine and an implement for a number of hours as opposed to short time frames. But we're also working with hydrogen fuel cells, for example, so we can be converting that combustion generation to clean fuel, like with the use of hydrogen. We're seeing 30% more efficiency in operating hours with autonomous vehicles. So just the fact that the vehicle can make a turn and decision very quickly, it doesn't stop for smoke or brakes, a whole lot of things. We can cover 30% more area with the same size machine, and we're also we're using a lot of smart technology around spray applications, so reducing chemicals by 30 to 40%, targeting, being able to target sprays to canopy densities, not spraying where there's gaps, and starting to use that smart technologies, and all that's really feeding a lot into a lot of our farmers' challenges to be heading to a carbon zero farming operation in the future.
Thanks. Nick?
Yeah, I think there's two things for me in particular around sustainability. Firstly, it's financial sustainability, so that ties into what we're just talking about around reduction in the use of pesticides, herbicides, and also fertiliser as well. Been using variable rate technology for a long period of time, but also on top of that also is the traceability. So from paddock to plate, where we can actually trace absolutely every step of the way of what we have produced, how we've produced it, our carbon footprint, and we can then say to an end user, well, that's how we've got that grain to you. So yeah, that technology all sort of plays hand in hand, and being able to access that easily and build a report or come up with a report for someone at a click of a button is really, it's really exciting, and we can do it now, which is great.
Yeah, terrific. Dave, bring it home.
Oh, I can deliberately misinterpret your question, being the last one. All of the above we've heard, and the 7 whys on slide 3 of my talk. At the end of the day, de-risking the business environment, the physical environment we're in, and the people environment we're in. So for me, it's de-risking.
Thank you. Well, that brings us right up to 11:30, which is where we were going to finish. So thank you very much to all our panellists. Thank you, Steve, Sue, thank you, Nick and Dave, and we'll move on to the next session. Thank you.